Willkommen to It's Not Rocket Science, written by Clopfic in the comments. Jetstream pushed open the door to his two-story Las Vegas penthouse condo, groaning in frustration as he threw his bags onto his foyer's floor and his keys onto the nearby side table. The light cream-colored Pegasus with a red and orange mane finally had a moment to compose himself after the disaster the past week had been. Stretching his wings, loosening his tie and collar, and running a hoof through his buzz cut after the long flight from Canterlot, he moaned as his wings remained stiff, partly outstretched, and it wasn't because they'd cramped up from a flight. Thinking back, Jetstream tried to understand where everything had gone wrong. He had started off by dropping off his 16-year-old filly, Apogee, at his ex-wife's junkyard outside Las Vegas. Although Apogee, a peach-colored Pegasus with a blue and green mane and her mother's indigo eyes, was now a veteran of the independent life of a child of divorced parents, he couldn't stomach leaving her on her own for a whole week. Besides, she loved spending time with her mother, Delta V, a pony that Jetstream had difficulty keeping a cordial relationship with. Although Delta V was always so lazy and negative, and blamed her lack of success in life on her pregnancy and their short, failed marriage, Jetstream tried to stay civil with her, for his daughter's sake. After managing to convince his ex to take care of their daughter for more than a single afternoon, seriously, Apogee adored her for some reason Jetstream could never understand, he had immediately left for Canterlot. It was the first iteration of the Canterlot commercialization of Space Expo, and a critical week for Jetstream's company, Equestrero, to land some major government contracts. Jetstream was the CEO of the struggling major airline, which had famously established itself as the leading provider for non-Pegasus-based air transport services on Equus over the past decade. The sleek, tube-bodied jet aircraft could outpace all but the fastest of Pegasi in a far more comfortable and quiet interior. The company would be making mountains of bits if Jetstream hadn't insisted on maintaining an extremely expensive aerospace R&D department. But regardless of his shareholders' desires, Jetstream was still adamant in his desire to build Equestria's first commercially viable spaceplane and make the science he and other ponies of EASA developed accessible to all. To do that, he needs some of the Crown's support. Not only were the heavens still officially the legal domain of the solar and lunar princesses, to the eye-rolling reaction of most serious scientists, but the costs of developing such an ambitious and huge project were heavily front-loaded and the benefits were extremely far in the future. Massive loans and subsidies from the Crown were a must. So it was that Jetstream found himself schmoozing with the royal representative for science expenditures throughout the entire week, Miss Harshwini. How she'd managed to land such a prestigious role escaped him. Perhaps she'd levered some of the political pull she'd gathered from her time as the organizer of the Equestrian Games. In any case, the mayor had looked right past the solid proposals and presentations of Equestriero and proceeded to aggressively sexually harass him. In other words, in my experience, I find stallions only able to meet the demanding needs of Crown requirements if they can prove themselves to have incredible stamina and be able to satisfy the desires of the mayors who make up the majority of Equestria and pay the majority of equestrian taxes. The fact that she had been wrapping her tail around his inner thigh as she said this only confirmed her outdated sexist thinking. So, Jetstream spent an entire week pretending to be Harshwini's vapid boy toy instead of an extremely intelligent and powerful pony he was, hanging off her every word, giggling at her terribly acidic and sarcastic humor, massaging her shoulders and flank at her demand, and accompanying her to after-conference cocktail parties and bars to be her little stallion trophy amongst the Canterlot elite. The fact that it was incredibly demeaning. Seriously, it felt like he was a kept stallion from the Victorian hoof era, was only made worse by Harshwini's terrible blue balling. Every opportunity she had, she'd be flashing her middle-aged marehood at him, or nuzzling his neck and licking his ear, or dragging her blonde silky tail through his thigh along his balls and sheath, Without fail, she would end each night using her hoof to stroke his wings until he had a painful wing boner, only to chuckle and say that she'd need to wait until the conference was finished and she'd made her decision before inviting him over to her place for a romp due to the ethics rules associated with being the royal representative. He had grinned and bore it though, knowing that it was all for the greater good of his company and equestrian science. It couldn't get any worse, right? Well, he was wrong. Of course, just a few hours from the end of the conference, Harshwini had disappeared from his side for a few moments, when he'd been looking at a young colt's presentation on utilizing compression with turbo scramjets to skip across the atmosphere. Jetstream had noted with a grin that he was basing his work off one of Delta V's old university papers. After a couple of desperate hours looking for her, she'd appeared in the main hall with a different stallion hanging off her withers. Tesla Musk, a young unicorn stallion and Jetstream's biggest rival, the founder of Space Z. Harshwini had grinned evilly at him as she announced to the conference that the Crown had chosen the young, energetic company to satisfy its needs and unveiled the Space Z EASA joint venture. Dumbfounded, seriously, all that stupid Musk wanted to do was have regular rockets that landed on remote-controlled ships. How would that be a big breakthrough? Jetstream had left in a huff to board his private jet to head back to Las Pegasus. Frustrated both mentally and sexually, he'd asked the cold steward. Unfortunately, the cute mare stewardess was sick for a never-ending stream of scotch from wheels up to landing. So it was that he found himself in his foyer, mentally discombobulated and nearly drunk, his wings half extended in arousal and a partial erection growing in his loins. At least he could draw a nice hot bath, pour himself a glass of wine, send out a pair of nice young Las Pegasus mares, maybe even have them dress up like Harshwini, and put on a Hoofington accent, then get them to stick their flanks up in the... Jetstream's fantasizing was interrupted as he noticed that his granite kitchen island countertop was a huge mess. 3 bowls of Boopo Roops in a pizza box layout, along with a mix of candy wrappers and potato chip bags. But how? The cleaners would have come earlier this morning. The only other pony who had a key to his place was... Hey, Dad. Oh. Apogee. What are you doing here? Jetstream asked, his erection dying quickly and shriveling back and his wings folding back. He couldn't believe he was going to be blue-balled again. Mom said that you were back today, so she decided to drop me off a day early. Apogee called from the living area. Bucking lazy as usual, Delta V. Didn't want to spend one more minute with our daughter, did you? Jetstream thought angrily. Delta V was supposed to watch her tonight. She'd take a big risk sending Apogee back early if things had gone according to plan. He backed up. With Harshwini about now, she must have heard that SpaceZ had landed the contract and decided to rub it in. Great. Jetstream groaned as he began to clean the kitchen. Something was tickling his nose, a weird scent that seemed so familiar and tangy. Was it coming from the cold pizza or something? How'd your thing go, Dad? Apogee asked absently from the living area, his nostrils flaring as the pervasive odor continued rushing through his senses. He picked up the envelope, which was next to the haphazard pile of Apogee's travel bag. He opened it as he replied, fine, hun. Where are you? Right here, Dad. I'm just playing Lunar Lander. Apogee's voice called from nearby, though he couldn't see her. Oh, Mom left an envelope for you. It's on my bag. Jetstream headed around the counter, noticing that the smell hung thicker in the air here, and it was getting muskier. Involuntarily reacting, he felt his erection begin to swell slightly again in its sheath. He paused to open the envelope, seeing Delta V's sloppy handwriting inside. Hello, Jet. I saw that Musk landed the big funding contract. Or should I say laid. Harshwini was one of the advisors on my contract to Junk, the guard's old chariot brigade, so I know how she acts. Sucks to be you. I'm sure after the week with Harshwini you had other plans for tonight, so I thought this would be a perfect chance to give you a taste of your own medicine and see how much fun it is to have your daughter unexpectedly dropped off in your lap. Jetstream grumbled in anger under his breath. Using Apogee to get back at me like that. Unbelievable. Before reading on, turnabout's fair play, asshole. For what it's worth, your space plane was a better idea. Reminds me of when we met and were dreaming about exactly that in the old Waffle House. Before you knocked me up and bucked up my life, that is. P.S. Don't take out your frustrations with me on Apogee. She's had a tough couple of days. I think she's going into her first estrus cycle. You'll be beating off to the horny little colts with a stick if hers, or anything like mine, were when I was her age. Have fun with that. Jetstream cumbled the letter in shock and anger. The smell. It suddenly rushed back to him where the scent was familiar from. Delta V's college room partway through the spring semester. The powerful, tangy cinnamon scent diffused everywhere in her dorm room. Her winking marehood, the countless hours they'd spent that weekend in her bed as he rutted her into oblivion. Jetstream felt his erection begin to lengthen and slide partway out of its sheath, throbbing with each of his rapidly increasing heartbeats. Delta V had screamed out his name over and over as her clenching college co-ed love tunnel had milked his shaft dry. "Dad?" a cute young filly's voice said. "You okay?" Apogee's question interrupted Jetstream's sexual memory of her mother just as he stepped around the corner into the living room. The scent had become almost overpowering now. It felt like the female pheromones in the air were actually condensing and dripping in his nostrils, a potent biochemical that was making his heart race and his head fuzzy. He walked around the corner to the couch to see his 16-year-old filly Pegasus daughter spread out on the floor prone, playing Lunar Lander on her Pretendo Joy Boy. She was looking at the small gray brick in heavy concentration, her tongue sticking out the front side of her muzzle as she tried to maneuver the small craft to a safe virtual landing on Luna's moon. But Jetstream wasn't paying any attention to his daughter's misapplication of virtual propellant. His eyes were focused squarely on her rear. She had placed one of the sofa's throw cushions on the floor under her hips, lifting her flank up in the air. Her tail was pulled up in a bun, with the tail wrap exposing her plot for all to see. Jetstream gulped as he saw his teenage daughter's slightly darker genitals, his gaze tracing from the tail hole down to her mare lips. They were clearly swollen and aroused, a slight hint of pink visible and suggesting that her young interior was burning with lust within. Ahem. Jetstream tried clearing his throat, only to almost choke on the heavy scent hanging in the air, which he now knew had originated from his daughter's aroused vagina. What's with that tail style? Apogee sprung up, her joy boy forgotten, as she faced her father, a light flush on her face. "Do you like it? It's the latest style from Manhattan, and all the girls at school are wearing these now." She smiled. Jetstream gulped down another swallow of the thick pheromones in the air. If fillies had worn tail styles like that when he was in school, he'd never have graduated. "Come on, Dad. Tell me if you think it looks good on me." Apogee circled away from him to show off her butt. "I think it makes my flank look great." Jetstream's fatherly mind wanted to say that the style was completely inappropriate for a filly her age, that she needed to wear her tail down until she was at least 18, but something wasn't working right in his brain, and instead what escaped him in his mouth was, "Fuck yeah, it looks sexy." Jetstream blinked in surprise that he had said that, shaking his head as if trying to clear the air around it from Apogee's estrus haze. He stumbled out of the sofa and slumped in his seat. Apogee blushed a little bit and giggled. Thanks, Dad." She turned around and bent down to pick up her joy boy, wings still slightly outstretched. As she looked up, her eyes slid over Jetstream's increasingly visible erection before looking away in embarrassment and excitement. Had she just given her dad a boner? No, that couldn't be. Jetstream noticed his daughter's glance at the subsequent blushing aversion of her eyes and realized she was looking at his dick. Grabbing another throw pillow, he quickly covered his crotch. "Sorry, hun. It was a long week and I was thinking of a mare I met." Jetstream lied quickly. Obviously, he couldn't admit that he'd just gotten harder from looking at his daughter's teenage snatch. Blushing and chuckling awkwardly, Apogee looked away as she sat on the glass coffee table. "No worries, Pop. Apogee had seen her father nude many times. They were both ponies after all. She knew that stallions sometimes got erections. Sorry about the funking here, by the way. Apogee's nose twitched as she continued mashing the buttons on her Joy Boy entertainment system. I've been smelling weird all day and didn't get a chance to shower this morning. I've been meaning to crack a window. No. I like your smell. Reminds me of your mom. Jetstream blurted out, his head swimming. What did he just said to his daughter? But how are you feeling, sweetie? He managed to stammer out as he felt his shafts throbbing under the couch cushion. Apogee replied without looking up. Actually, I've been feeling a bit funny all afternoon. Apogee responded as she wiggled her butt on the coffee table. With her tail up in a bun, Jetstream knew that she was wriggling her hot little ponut on fillyhood on the cold glass of the coffee table. Stop! He mentally rebunked himself from fantasizing about his daughter's genitals smashing against the glass. Actually, Dad, I felt a little lonely and uncomfortable, like I haven't in a long time. Apogee paused her Joy Boy and looked up at her father, her piercing indigo eyes burning deep into his. Jetstream could see her mother, Delta V, in that stare. The same burning desire, the insatiable lust, only it was coming from the cute, freckled face of a 16-year-old daughter. I was kinda wondering if you could kinda preen me for a bit, like you used to when I was younger? Jetstream gulped, the last vestiges of its conscious mind screaming at him to say no. It was so simple, just say no, get up and walk right into his room and shut the door and lock it, take a cold shower, get some sleep, and take Apogee down to the cooler shop in the morning and teach her how to deal with her estrus privately. The other road would lead, inevitability, like a rocket launch on an unstoppable countdown to a massive explosion. Nope, Jet began, until he saw his daughter's teary eyes. She was lonely, confused, aroused. Could he just walk away? No problem. Apogee squeaked as she bounced cutely over to the couch. Jetstream couldn't help but notice the snail trail of filly juice she left on the coffee table before his daughter suddenly leapt onto him without warning. What the... Jetstream began, as Apogee had hopped onto the cushion, perched over his crotch, snuggled her rear onto the satin pillow, and putting either rear leg on either side of his, before putting her forehooves on his rear legs as she faced away from him. There's this one primary that's really bugging me too. Apogee looked back over her shoulder as her flared wings span out, revealing the messy and ruffled feathers. Jetstream began to slowly and methodically set his daughter's feathers into place, something he hadn't done since she was a little filly and was doing this for the first time. He had never told her that, although preening was something that parents helped their children with. As Pegasi became older, it had a very different meaning once they got past sexual maturity. Preening between adult Pegasi was an activity that would traditionally be done only by married couples. It was something extremely intimate, and it was considered to be something that you would do for your mate after sex to ensure that the disheveled thrusting and acrobatics of Pegasi coitus would not result in unaerodynamic wings. Jetstream shifted another primary on his daughter's left wing as he remembered how he'd done the same for the filly's mother after blowing a load across her back. They chuckled about how his semen could act as a good natural oil for Delta's feathers before the preening had developed into a more sweaty, mindless sex. Jetstream felt his erection stiffen even more and began to peek out from under the cushion as it grew and expanded up his belly towards his belly button. Without thinking, he leaned forward and under his daughter's right wing to where wingpit was, nuzzling his nose against one of her preening glands to get a little bit of the oil on his nose to help align and set her larger feathers. Dad, Apogee squeaked, a shiver shaking through her body. Jetstream felt like he'd just been punched in the face. He'd totally forgotten how the oils of a mare in heat were absolutely saturated in sex pheromones. The evolutionary thinking being that by spreading the scent all over the Pegasus mare's wings, she would more clearly signal her readiness to mate and reproduce. To fuck. Jetstream felt his shaft reach full mast, bulging and throbbing against his chest where it was pinned by the pillow in his daughter's rump. He looked down at that plot, able to clearly see his daughter's teenage ponut and just the top of the swollen pussy mashing against the top of the velvet pillow. He reached forward with his snout and drew a long lick from the middle of his daughter's sweaty back to her left wing, where a primary feather ready for removal clearly protruded. "Dad," Apogee moaned as she wriggled her hips at his lick, grinding herself against the pillow and creating blissful agony for the both of them. "Wait, something feels..." Jetstream nipped the primary gingerly with his teeth and plucked the broken vein of the feather out from his daughter, extracting it smoothly. Apogee drew 2 shuddering half-breaths before she shook heavily, grinding her hips and letting out a loud moan. Half a moment later, Jetstream felt a wetness on his lap and heard a light dripping sound from the edge of the couch down to the floor below. Apogee had just climaxed. "Oh man, this is so embarrassing," Apogee began, mortified that she had just orgasmed from her father preening her, but she was cut off before she could finish. Jetstream dipped his head down to look at his lap where his daughter's butt had ground itself into a now soaking cushion. A flexible stallion, Jetstream was able to lower his nose to where the small puddle was trickling off the back of the cushion onto his chest fur, and his hard shaft still pooled against his young daughter's plump ponut and the barest glimpse of the top of her mare hood. He buried his nose in the flesh and inhaled deeply, sucking in his daughter's intoxicating scent. "Embarrassing?" Apogee squeaked in shock as she felt her father's nose against her tail hole. Jetstream's cock was now rock hard and had begun to drool its own juices. It was a clear indicator that Jetstream's mission control had put the overdrive switch on aux. He was in full biological stallion mode now. Jetstream pulled his nose out of his daughter's butt with a hearty snort. "Okay, sweetie, let's get your ass off the cushion. I want to ruin it now." Jetstream grabbed his daughter's tailbone with his left hoof and lifted her by the dock momentarily as he slid the cushion out from under her. "Dad?" Apogee asked with some trepidation, knowing that by removing the cushion, she would be dripping directly onto her father, a very private part of her father. She blushed bright red at the embarrassing thought, even as she imagined her father's cock getting wet with her juices. For some reason it excited her. She wondered about how thick and big it was. Was it as large as some other ponies in the Play Pony magazines her mom had given her? What color was it? She shook her head to try and clear it of the sexy thoughts about her dad and tried to keep herself propped up on her rear hooves. Holding her hips off her dad's lap, she couldn't sit on them when she was in this state. Or could she? Celestia, did she ever want to? All day she'd been thinking about colts and their dicks like never before, and now there was a big hunky colt of her dad right under her. Her fillyhood ached so bad, she just wanted to rub it against her dad's lap and make it feel better. But that would be so embarrassing. She had to get off of him before she dripped on him or sat on him in the state she was. Apogee made to get up off the couch, only to feel her father's strong hooves grip her flank and pull her back. "Hold on, hun. I haven't finished your wing massage yet." Jetstream growled fiercely into her ear, an aggressiveness that Apogee had never heard before, and that made her heart flutter. She felt her father's hooves on her tight teenage flank squeeze tightly and force her to sit down on him with a wet slap. She felt her tight little flanks against the father's thighs and a thick, hot sausage-like object between them that rose up to wedge itself against the burning lower lips in her tight tail pucker. "Buck, you're a naughty little filly, aren't you, Apogee?" Jetstream moaned as he felt his daughter's wet, sticky teenage snatch laying against his stallion hood, her juices slathering over him and trickling down to his testicles as her heat sandwiched his lower shaft. His daughter's pucker rested against the underside of his flare, twitching as it touched the juices dribbling out of his cock slit. "Oh man, Dad," Apogee yelped as she felt the wing snap to full attention on either side of her. "I feel..." She trailed off as she felt her father's hooves kneading the back muscles in ways she didn't know possible. She squeaked and tried to lean forward to relieve some of the downward pressure she was exerting on her pussy against her father's shaft and to escape Jetstream's massage, but he wasn't having it. Sweetie, you sit right up and straight for me." Jetstream moaned into his daughter's freckled right ear as he pulled back so that she was sitting straight up, then forced her hips down his shaft again so she was grinding her pussy along his cock, sandwiching in between her lower lips. "Dad?" Apogee squeaked as she felt her father's shaft spreading her lips and mashing her small winking clitoris against his cock. She felt another embarrassing squirt of her juices slip from her and continued to make their laps sloppy and wet. Jetstream continued to knead his hooves into his daughter's sensitive dorsal flight muscles, teasing and tweaking the sensual area as he felt her wetness soaking the couch beneath them. If she was at all like her mother, then she'd have a weak spot right there. He twisted the edge of his hoof on a particularly coiled muscle. "Yes!" Apogee suddenly chirped as she began to hump forward and back against her father's shaft, pinned between her nethers and his chest. Good girl, good girl. Now keep sliding like that for your dad." Jetstream whispered into her ear with a little lick as he reached around his teenage daughter in an embrace, one hoof wrapping around her upper chest and another dropping down to her lower abdomen to tweak her small but pert teenage teats. "Oh, Celestia, Dad," Apogee groaned as she slid back and forth along her father's shaft, her marehood clenching and unclenching. "Dad, it feels so good." Apogee leaned her head back towards her father and opened her mouth, her tongue hanging out. Jetstream didn't hesitate and leaned forward, sucking his little daughter's panting tongue up into his mouth before driving forward into her mouth with his own tongue. Apogee's lazy rolling eyes snapped back open in shock as her father stole her first kiss. She felt his hot, powerful tongue muscle playing around in her mouth, tracing over her teeth and wrestling against her own tongue. For a moment she was shocked at the intensity of her dad's kissing. He wasn't her dad right now. He was a wild male stallion dominating her. She felt his hoof grasping at her little teats, the small nubs of her nipples hard from the ministrations. She felt his throbbing stallionhood against her filly parts, each throb making her gasp and clench involuntarily, and she realized she liked this. No, she loved this. She closed her eyes and leaned forward into her father's passionate kiss, melting into his control completely as he handled her like an adorable little filly she was. Breaking the kiss with a wet smack, Jetstream took his hooves back to his daughter's back and traced down from between her wings to the start of her tail muscles. Perched between her small but pert flanks, kneading in there, he was able to push her teenage marehood against him even more powerfully, before dripping under her tail and touching her tight tail hole. Reacting to this, Apogee began to grind faster and harder, sensing his daughter was close to orgasming again. Jetstream reached down with a hard slap to the teenage flanks, which set her off on the chain reaction. "Dad," Apogee squeaked as she leaned back into her father and squirted forward onto the floor below in a small torrent of sex juices. Her body convulsed and shuddered for half a minute as she squeaked and writhed in the flow of ecstasy. There was no stopping Jetstream now. With a sudden movement, he threw his daughter forward off of the couch. Her eyes opened in surprise as she landed on the floor below, her fore hooves clattering to the glass coffee table, while her rear hooves landed shakily on the hardwood floor. Now, on all fours, for her fore hooves on the glass table and her little teenage wings outstretched, she looked back over her shoulder at her father with confusion on her face. "Huh?" Jetstream looked at her with a wicked grin, leaning back on the couch with one hoof idly stretched out beside him gripping the cushions. "Guess we're all done then, huh?" "But I thought... what?" Confusion on Apogee's face was apparent as she lifted an eyebrow and looked back at her father. Her eyes were drawn away from his grinning face to his stallionhood, now standing proudly at full attention. It wasn't quite as long as the colts and play pony, especially the big earth pony hunks, but it was thick. It was also right behind her, and it was way bigger in person than the magazines she'd look at under her covers with a flashlight at her mom's junkyard. Jetstream enjoyed teasing his daughter, looking forward to her dripping plot. She was young and inexperienced. He could see that in her face and demeanor, but her tight little butt more than made up for that as her tight teenage fillyhood winked invitingly at him over and over, at a pace that the middle-aged harsh Winnie could not hope to match. He twitched his abdominal muscles to make his cock jump tantalizingly. Apogee looked at her relaxed father, his wide cock twitching in her vision. She felt her pussy clenching and unclenching again and again, dripping to the hardwood floor below, and a part of her wanted to pull her tail down in embarrassment to hide her winking filly parts from her dad, who was in a prime position to get a full show. But another, deeper part of her was much louder, and was getting her to bend forward a little bit and tilt her hips a little so they were facing upwards a bit, to flag her tail muscles so that it lifted her dock up and aside. It wanted her dad, no her stallion, to mount her with that beautiful organ. Jetstream smiled, his mind completely drunk on his daughter's airborne sexual hormones and the scotch he'd drowned earlier. "Do you need something, hon? I think you should be getting to bed now, no?" He reached down and idly stroked his shaft. Abigail's cheeks puffed out a little bit. "Dad, don't be lame. Are we gonna do this?" Abigail asked with a blush. Her rear was burning with desire. How could he not know what she wanted? "Doing what, huh?" "You know, that." Jetstream grinned. "We really shouldn't. Come on, hon. You're gonna have to ask for it." He loved making mares beg to be rutted. Loved to make them talk filthy. It wasn't connecting in his head that this was his daughter of 16 years that he was making beg. Abigail got a little teary-eyed. I don't know how to. I just... please, Dad." She wiggled her hips a bit. Jetstream would usually have resisted, but he couldn't help when his daughter begged. He hopped to all fours and mounted his daughter. Abigail squeaked in fear as her father's big heavy hooves landed on the outside of hers on the coffee table. She realized then that he was a much bigger pony than her. She felt his rear hooves briefly kick her rear hooves, so she was a bit of a wider stance. It made her feel more open and vulnerable as her hooves began to slip on the slick hardwood floor. They slid outwards and bumped into her father's rear hooves, giving her purchase to make her feel totally engulfed by the larger pony on top of her. And then he laid his weight onto her. Oh, she felt her father's bulk rest down on her back, his heavy weight making her lock her legs to support him. She could feel something hot and heavy on his lower back laid across her spine like a hot pipe before it ran between her flanks and against her tail. She wiggled her hips to adjust it, but felt her father pull his hips back. The pipe slid off of her, the head writhing along her plot and poking at the small, plump left flank before it adjusted itself and slid suddenly into place it was designed to be by their natural biology. Jetstream put his flare up against his daughter's teenage pussy, which was still clenching and drooling. He leaned forward and nipped his daughter's ear playfully. "Dad?" Abigail groaned and instinctively pushed her hips back against his flare, and he pushed forward. Abigail shouted through her clenched teeth as her little fillyhood stretched outwards desperately at the pressure being exerted by both bodies against the wet junction between lips and flare. Abigail squealed again as her small clitoris winked against her father's flare before the straining labial lips finally slipped over Jetstream's coronal ridge, wedging his cockhead into her body. "Buck," Abigail squeaked as her marehood clenched and unclenched painfully on his father's thick cock, squirting sloppily along the underside of his shaft. "You're inside." Jetstream felt his daughter's incredibly tight marehood clenching and squeezing on him. Thankfully, her hymen was either very thin or had been broken in some other way, as he not felt anything after his little girl's pussy had finally left his fat cockhead penetrate her. He sat there, unmoving for a minute or so, letting his daughter adjust to him and relax. Jetstream knew he was a thick stallion, and even the Las Pegasus call girls would ask him to give them a moment after he entered them to relax around him before he'd start pounding. After a minute or two, he felt Abigail finally beginning to unclench around him, and her body untensed ever so slightly as she began to shift left and right, playing with her feeling as a much larger shaft of meat being inside of her. "Wow, Dad, you're big," Abigail said with a little wiggle of her hips. "Okay, hon, I'm gonna rut your little butt now." Abigail chuckled at her father's impromptu rhyme. "Ready?" Abigail nodded nervously. Pulling back ever so slightly, Jetstream pushed forward, eliciting a little yelp from his daughter. He hadn't moved in her at all, the tightness just moving her whole body instead of permitting more of his dick to slide into her. Jetstream kept rocking back and forth against his daughter, both of their bodies moving in unison as he added just a tiny bit more force with each rock. And suddenly he began to sink deeper into her, his flare moving past the entrance and parting deeper into her hot, twisting teenage love tunnel. "Dad?" Apogee squeaked as she felt a new sensation of her father's cock opening new depths in her. But Jetstream didn't answer, just continuing to rock back and forth with the same pressure that had allowed him to slip a slightly deeper. Apogee was no longer being driven back and forth with her father's light thrusts. Now her teenage pussy was noisily squelching as it let half inch after half inch of her father's stallionhood into her body. Apogee squeaked with each thrust as she grit her teeth and clenched her eyes. Jetstream leaned down and laid a loving lick across his daughter's muzzle. "Relax, hun. Enjoy it. Relax and feel my cock spreading you out." Apogee listened and relaxed, untensing her muscles. "That's it. I want you to try wiggling a little bit with your butt. Yeah, just like that. Fun, isn't it?" Apogee chuckled and looked up at her father lovingly. They continued that way for another 5 minutes or so, Jetstream moving slowly and Apogee trying different movements and squeezes of her muscle. In between little stolen kisses and pecks from her dad, during one particular hip gyration and clench of her butt, something twinkled in Apogee. Her wings shot out and she yelped aloud. Jetstream felt his daughter's orgasm, her tight love tunnel rhythmically tensing and clenching around him to try and milk and coax him into an orgasm. A moment later, a loud splatter filled the room as Apogee released a fresh squirt of juice onto the floor below. "Sorry, Dad." Apogee was blushing and her ears were splayed back. Jetstream laughed and leaned in. "Don't be sorry, Apogee. That's my good girl squirting like that. Now, it's my turn. Hang on, okay?" He began to thrust a little harder, now that Apogee was more comfortable and feeling a little bit more relaxed. He wouldn't have been able to tell from how tight her fillyhood was, but at least she wasn't spasming it anymore. Jetstream's latest, most powerful thrust brought his medial ring right up to his daughter's outer lip. Up until now, he had been working with the upper part of his dick. That was about to change. "Dad, what is that?" Apogee asked with some fright as the medial ring began to push into her with subsequent thrusts. Driving with his hips, Jetstream pushed the little girl onto the glass coffee table, knocking off some books as it fell away to the floor. As her chest was pressed against the tabletop and her front hooves splayed out in front of her, poising her teenage plot high in the air to allow him to pile drive into her. "Dad?" Apogee squeaked again as the medial ring slipped in and her father drove deeper into her body, stretching her wide with each push. "Buck, you're tight." Jetstream moaned as he forced more of his thick stallionhood into his teenage daughter, each slamming thrust driving a 1/4 inch more of him into her. He was nearing the fattest, widest base of his cock now, and Apogee had developed a mindless squeaking as her tongue lolled out of her mouth onto the table. Dad. Each exhalation came with another thrust, until suddenly Jetstream felt his cockhead mashing against something deep inside the girl. He'd reached her cervix. Apogee's wings shot straight out, and her fillyhood began to clench and twist on him, squirting obscenely as he began to climax from the stimulation of her cervix. "Just like your mother," Jetstream thought. Pushing just a little more, he felt the teenage filly's cervix shift ever so slightly, finally permitting him to fully enter her up to the hilt. Now, he was going to town, slamming in and out of her with big, powerful strokes, each one causing his balls to swing forward and slap against his daughter's marehood with a little wet smacking sound. The sounds of their union and Apogee's groaning filled the condo until Jetstream felt his member stiffen and his flare widen. Get ready!" Jetstream leaned down and squeezed his daughter in a tight embrace as he nipped into her mane, setting off her own squeaking and writhing. A moment later, the first thick rope of semen splattered into his daughter's womb. Jetstream was already a prodigious producer. Delta V used to joke that he was named after his ejaculation until she'd gotten pregnant by one of his cum shots. This evening, after an entire week of being teased and denied in Canterlot, Jetstream was packing more than his average load. "Buck," Jetstream moaned as he unloaded again and again with little thrusts into his girl. The relief was incredible as he felt a thick backup that had built up in his prostate and seminal vesicles over the past 7 days, draining out with each clench of his muscles. Abigail's eyes were rolling back in her head as her biology flooded her with dopamine and other ecstasy-inducing neurochemicals. Her estrus was filling with her father's spunk and small teenage organ, quickly filling to completion before starting to strain outwards. Her father's rigid flare wedging the cockhead against her cervix and not permitting the semen to flow out into the clenching vaginal canal. "Dad," she moaned as her belly bulged ever so slightly. Nothing obscene, just a small, paunchy budge that gave her a little bump to the belly button down to her nethers. "Fuck." Whew. Jetstream moaned as he felt the last spasm slide out from his cock slit. He leaned down next to his daughter, panting heavily as he felt her continuing to squeeze and milk him. She looked at him with drunken, dazed eyes. "Dad, that was awesome." The two lay there for a few minutes, basking in each other's sweaty afterglow, before Jetstream grunted and stood up. It took some effort and maneuvering, but Jetstream slowly wriggled his still rock-hard shaft out of his daughter, ignoring the little squeaks and grunts as her tight pussy continued to clench and grasp at his stallion hood, not wanting it to withdraw. Finally, he pulled his flare out of the sloppy pussy, a huge gush of cum flowing out, with 1 or 2 glugs splattering to the ground as his daughter's small belly flattened back out. "That was amazing, Dad," Abigail mewed as she rolled over onto the floor on her back, avoiding the huge puddle of their juices. She was breathing heavily and looking up from under her sweaty bangs at her father, standing over her with his erect and dripping shaft. "Sure was, hun." Jetstream flinched, his balls still hurting. He couldn't believe it, but even after that release he was still hard, still needed a little more to clear his lust. "Dad, what's wrong? You're still..." Abigail looked at him. In all their health classes, the stallion was supposed to be done after, well, you know. "Well, hun, I think I'm not quite done yet." Jetstream bent over his daughter's supping form. "Can you help your dad out?" Abigail blinked, trying to clear her spinning, lusty vision. "Fuck yeah, Dad." She wriggled to the ground in joy. Jetstream looked down at his teenage daughter, her pussy still sloppily drooling his spunk. That hole was out of the question. But the other option, could he really, though? Abigail shifted her hips a bit, revealing the tight little ponut covered in the drool of his spunk. Yes, he could. "Language, young lady." Jetstream leaned down into his daughter, planting his forehooves above her hips for leverage, and he aligned his cock. "Okay, hon, this is gonna feel a lot different." Abigail squeaked as her father gripped her hips again and shifted her into position. "Ooh, belly-to-belly dolphin style, like in Mom's kinky novels." Jetstream frowned as he looked up at his daughter, giggling. "She shouldn't be leaving those around for you to read." He shifted again to align his flare with his teenage girl's tail hole. Dad?" Abigail's face scrunched up cutely. "I think that's the wrong..." Jetstream pushed with his hips and pulled with his forehooves, mashing his flare against her tight ponut. At first it just pushed into her body, under her dock, but then slowly but surely the tight puckering ring began to slowly spread outwards around his fat cock. "Dad, that's my butthole." Abigail squeaked before puffing up her cheeks and clenching tightly against her father's invasion of her tail hole. "Hun, relax. Breathe." Jetstream lectured, staring deep at her. "That's it, relax. Loosen. There you go, relax your anus. More. Deep breaths now." Abigail breathed out. "That's it, one more time. Almost in." "Dad, it's real hot. It feels weird." Abigail squeaked. Jetstream looked down, seeing his daughter's tight ponut finally slip over his head, his whole flare slipping into her suddenly. "Ow." Abigail squeaked, her eyes rolling back as her father penetrated her tail hole. "Buck, hon, you're just as tight as your mom." Jetstream couldn't help himself and began to push forward into his teenage daughter's hot asshole as it clenched and provided insane tightness around him. Jetstream was perched on his rear hooves, with his legs splayed out and his daughter splayed out face up in his lap, holding on with his legs and keeping her against him as he thrust deeper and deeper into her hot teenage anus. The little thrust dove him deeper and deeper in, until his medial ring bumped against her ponut. There was no way that was going in. "That Buck," Apogee squeaked. "You're rutting my butt." Jetstream felt his daughter's twitching anus clenching on him, and he watched her sloppy teenage pussy clenching and releasing, drilling his spunk out and down over her asshole. The pair began to slide across the floor as Apogee's sweaty back and spread wings provided little friction against the hardwood floor. They slid right into the small first-floor bathroom with its cold tile floor. Apogee's forehooves were held against the chest like a dog begging for a belly rub as her father fucked her asshole. Finally, Apogee's cute little head slid up against the base of the standalone sink, her head bumping up against the cold white porcelain again and again with each of Jetstream's thrusts. Apogee squeaked as her head continued bonking against the base of the sink, Jetstream's shaft throbbing in her tight asshole. I'm close," Jetstream moaned, feeling his teenage daughter climaxing on him again, her 8th of the night. He looked at her face, the eyes squinting and rolling together and nearly going cross-eyed as her muzzle scrunched and fell open, her ears twitching and splaying back while her freckles disappearing behind a heavy blush. It was too perfect. He knew what he had to do. Pulling back quickly, he felt his daughter's anus stretch and grip at him as his slick cock shaft slid out of her tail hole, not wanting to permit him to withdraw, the tight ring of muscles stimulating him, and his cock head slid out, finally pushing him over the edge as he began to flare out and stiffen. The first blast of cum fired in his daughter's asshole before he finally slid out and put his thick, spasming sausage onto his daughter's lower body, resting them on the teenage teats as he continued to fire thick, creamy strand after thick, creamy strand. The first splatters hit Apogee right in her still open muzzle, partially sliding down her tongue onto the back of her throat and partially rolling out of her lower lip and off of her chin. The next ropes hit her cheek and chest fluff, making thick strands over clear white gel in his daughter's fur. A thick blast hit her beautiful messy mane before the biggest rope flew out of him and landed across her muzzle between her eyes. The last few trickles drew lazily out of Jetstream, pooling on Apogee's teenage teats as Jetstream's cock shrunk and limply retreated across his daughter's belly. The lust and biological override finally subsiding from Jetstream like a thick fog lifting from his eyes. The shock and horror of what he had done finally began to dawn on Jetstream, with a cold lump forming in his stomach as he looked down at his daughter, her eyes askew in post-orgasmic bliss covered in semen, her tail hole stretched and drooling unspeakable juices, and worst of all, her tight teenage snatch leaking a steady stream of her father's potent spunk down into her tail. "Buck," Jetstream muttered as he began to faint, the last thing he heard as he fell on his daughter's sticky, sweaty body. "I love you, Dad." It's 9 o'clock at night. I'm reading incest porn, an hour of it, not just like a couple minutes, it's a straight hour of it. You gotta wonder, what the hell am I doing? Oh well, hope you guys have enjoyed. Have a wunderbar day.